Welcome to the debate. Imagine an absolutely pitch black forest.
Yeah, freezing rainstorm just lashing down, completely obscuring all vision.
Right, and it's deafening. And suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning tears through the dark, and for just a fraction of a second, it illuminates a figure slowly drifting down from the sky on a parachute.
It's an incredibly cinematic image of a hostile infiltration.
It is, but when that enemy spy lands directly into the waiting hands of counterintelligence, well, we have to ask ourselves, what exactly are we witnessing?
Right, because the immediate question any investigator would ask is why an elite operative would seemingly drop straight into a trap. And more importantly, once they have this operative, how do they actually go about dismantling the masterful illusions this spy brings with them?
Exactly. So today, we are diving into Kemel Tokayev's novel Night Shot. And it provides this meticulous, almost surgical look at the dismantling of enemy espionage.
It really does.
And my stance on this material is that taking down a highly trained spy is ultimately a brutal exercise in applied physics. Reality is strictly material. Disguises, alibis, operational strategies, they're ultimately broken by cold, hard empirical evidence. Criminology, chemistry, geometry. The illusion of the spy's invisibility is destroyed by the uncompromising laws of gravity and matter.
Well, see, I read the exact same material and came to the complete opposite conclusion.
Really?
Yeah, to me, all of that physical stuff, the forensic evidence, the footprints, the passports, it's really just set dressing for a psychological war. The physical tools merely serve much deeper cognitive strategies. The true dismantling of a spy happens within the mind, exploiting trauma, ego, and cognitive bias.
But espionage, particularly as detailed here, it is a profoundly material endeavor. Enemy agents don't rely on magic to hide. They use tangible tools. They deploy complex chemical compounds, specifically synthesized to physically burn the olfactory receptors of tracker dogs.
Sure, they use physical tools.
Right, meticulously forged passports, polymer facial pastes to alter their physical dimensions. But those illusions shatter the moment they collide with forensic reality. Take the footprint in the mud, for example.
Ah, the one where they calculate the suspect's weight?
Yes. An investigator calculates the suspect's exact weight, 75 kilograms, solely from the depth of a size 42 footprint left in wet soil. That isn't psychoanalysis. That is applied physics. It is calculating the displacement of mass over a specific surface area based on the soil's moisture content and density.
I come at it from a different way. You are describing the mechanics of criminology as if they are the ultimate weapon, but you are looking at the symptoms, not the root cause.
How so?
Because the enemy's primary target is not the forensic lab. It is the flaw in human perception. They weaponize what we want to believe. If we look at the main antagonist, the former SS killer, Chernosov, his ultimate failure has nothing to do with a footprint or a poorly forged document. His documents are flawless.
Flawless on paper, perhaps.
Flawless in every material sense. He fails because his fabricated persona, this peaceful, mundane identity he has built, is conceptually and fundamentally incompatible with his deeply traumatized, violent psyche. A mask always cracks from the inside out. When the mind breaks under the weight of its own cognitive dissonance, the physical disguise becomes completely irrelevant.
Well, to see where your psychological framing hits a wall, we should look at the very first point of contact between the enemy and counterintelligence. Let's go back to that paratrooper drop in the Black Forest we started with.
Right, Yakupov.
Exactly. The spy, Yakupov, drops into a freezing rainstorm illuminated only by a flash of lightning for the old forester. From an operational standpoint, the spy is relying heavily on kinetic elements. He is using the blinding rain, the auditory masking of the thunder, and the severely limited visibility as a physical shield. It is a calculated deployment of environmental physics to obscure an infiltration.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
If you focus entirely on the rain and the thunder, you miss the actual mechanism of the drop. Yakupov isn't using the storm to hide. The drop itself is a deliberate psychological sacrifice. The enemy network is handing Yakupov over directly to the investigators to trigger a highly specific cognitive phenomenon known as premature gestalt closure.
Wait, hold on. So by catching a spy, the investigators actually make themselves vulnerable?
Exactly. The human brain organically despises unresolved tension. It constantly seeks closure, the completion of a pattern. By dropping a spy essentially right into the lap of counterintelligence, the enemy ensures that the investigators experience an immediate, intoxicating sense of triumph. They catch the spy, the tension resolves, the brain checks the box, and the gestalt is closed.
And what does that actually do to the investigators on the ground?
It creates a neurological blind spot. The moment they feel that wave of success, their brains automatically turn off their background threat scanning mechanisms. Think of it like turning off your home's entire security system just because you locked the front door. It is created on purpose so that the true resident spy can slip past them entirely unnoticed. They aren't hiding in the rain. They are hiding in the investigator's psychological relief.
I see the elegance in that theory, I do. But the reason that mental trap feels is entirely due to microscopic chemistry.
Microscopic?
Yes, the investigators, Beitakov and Bujanbayev, do not fall for the psychological theater. They don't sit down and analyze Yakupov's childhood or his motivations. They look at the material facts of his weapon.
Oh, the missing bullet?
Right. During the interrogation, Yakupov insists he fired only one accidental shot into the air. Mathematically, it seems to add up. There is exactly one bullet missing from his magazine. Your Gestalt closure trap should have worked perfectly right there. The box was checked.
But the investigators don't stop there.
Exactly. Because physics and chemistry intervene. They send the weapon to the lab. When a firearm is discharged, unburned particles of gunpowder soot are deposited inside the barrel. If you fire a gun twice, you don't just get a bigger pile of soot. You get a specific chemical layering.
How so? Like physically speaking?
Think of it like baking a cake. You pull it out of the oven, pour a layer of raw batter directly on top of it, and bake it again. The heat and pressure of that second shot fundamentally bake and alter the density of the soot left by the first shot. The laboratory analysis definitively proves, through strict chemical density mapping, that 2 shots were fired, not 1. The entire psychological manipulation, this grandiose mental trap you describe, is utterly shattered by microscopic carbon deposits. Physics definitively shuts down the psychological theater.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that forensic science only works if there is a physical mistake to measure?
What do you mean?
Yakupov made an error with his firearm. But what happens when the physical camouflage is flawless? Let's look at the antagonist's long-term camouflage. Chernosovtsov, the SS killer who transforms himself into the unassuming mechanic Astropov.
Well, I would argue that is a perfect example of the triumph of anthropometry over illusion. He uses theatrical makeup, fake scars. He glues on a mole. He radically alters his posture. It is a masterful physical disguise. But how do the investigators actually crack it?
The photograph.
Yes, not through a psychological evaluation. The investigator sits at a desk with a photograph of the mutilated suspect. He takes a simple piece of white paper and covers the distorted, mutilated half of the face in the photo. What remains is the unchangeable architecture of the human skull.
The basic geometry of the face.
Precisely. It's like stripping away the drywall to find the foundational rebar of a building. You can apply all the polymer paste you want, but you cannot change the underlying skeletal geometry. The spatial distance from the center of the pupil to the top of the ear, the exact measurable angle of the jawbone, the cranial proportions.
Right.
These are biometric constants as unique and unalterable as a fingerprint. By relying on spatial geometry, the investigator strips away the disguise. The illusion is destroyed by mathematics.
I'll grant you that the geometry is what confirms his identity on paper. But think about the timeline here. Why does the investigator even have the opportunity to measure that photograph? The mask begins to fail long before anyone takes out a ruler. Chernonosov is undone by his own psychology, not by anthropometry.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because his disguise was physically impenetrable to the casual observer. He lived under that identity for years without anyone noticing the angle of his jawbone.
To the casual observer, yes, but not to his own subconscious.
Think about the pivotal scene in the dark room with the film projector. He is sitting there trying to maintain his peaceful reality, and the light cuts through the darkness to project old archival footage of a fascist Sonderkommando. On the screen, a mother is desperately shielding her child from bullets. Chernonosov was there. He was part of those atrocities. That visual trigger bypasses all of his logical defenses and acts as a massive psychological catalyst.
But that just proves he has a dark past. He has a moment of guilt or panic. It doesn't break his operational camouflage.
It absolutely breaks his camouflage because it triggers severe cognitive dissonance. He has spent years painstakingly building the reality of Ashropov, the peaceful mechanic, but his nervous system holds the reality of Svinsov, the mass murderer. It's like trying to run two radically conflicting operating systems on a single hard drive. Eventually, the whole system crashes. The human brain cannot simultaneously hold two radically opposing realities without fracturing.
So the footage forces the crash.
Exactly. The footage forces those two identities to collide. His subconscious violently rejects the fake reality he has built. That is why his composure cracks. That is why he ends up murdering his girlfriend Zina when she starts asking questions. It wasn't because she was measuring the angle of his jaw or looking at his skull architecture. He murdered her because his internal psychological architecture collapsed. The mask was destroyed from the inside out.
I understand the mechanism of cognitive dissonance. I do. But you are completely ignoring how counterintelligence actively weaponizes the physical environment to force those exact errors. They don't just sit back in an armchair and wait for his psyche to fracture. They provoke him using kinetic energy. Let's look at the restaurant provocation.
Ah, the scene with the decanter.
Yes. The operative, Talgot, is tailing Chernonosov in a smoky, neon-lit restaurant. Counterintelligence needs to test the suspect's composure. So Talgot acts drunk, stumbles over, and deliberately drops a heavy glass decanter right at Chernonosov's feet. The glass shatters with a massive crash. Now, this is not just a test of nerves. It is a masterpiece of operational kinetics in human physiology.
You're reducing a complex social interaction to physics again.
Because it is physics. The high-decibel crash of the glass is designed to trigger a very specific physiological reaction, the acoustic startle reflex. This is a brainstem response. It is faster than conscious thought. When a sudden, extremely loud sound occurs, the auditory nerve signals the pontine reticular formation in the brainstem.
Which does what exactly to a highly trained spy?
Think of it like a computer's emergency system interrupt. When that signal hits, the brain instantly drops all background processing to deal with the immediate threat. The body physically flinches, the eyes blink, and crucially, it shuts down peripheral vision. In that fraction of a second of sensory overload, Chernonosov is physiologically blinded. That is why he misses the tail. It is a biological hack using sound waves.
I'm sorry, but applying the acoustic startle reflex here completely misses the point of the scene. The glass decanter, the sound waves, the shattered glass, they are just props in a social theater.
Props.
Yes, the operation doesn't work because of a brainstem reflex. It works because of Chernosov's deeply ingrained social blindness.
Social blindness? The man nearly had heavy glass explode onto his shins. You can't social blind your way out of a physical flinch.
Now you might be listening to this and thinking, well, it doesn't matter how arrogant you are, if glass explodes at your feet, you look, and you do. But his reaction is not driven by the physics of the decanter, it's driven by who dropped it. Chernonosov is an ideological Superman in his own mind. He operates with an absolute, uncompromising superiority complex. When he looks at Talgot acting like a drunken, stumbling fool, he doesn't just see a nuisance. He feels animalistic, visceral disgust.
Right, he viewed him as beneath notice.
Exactly. He views this man as a pathetic worm, an Untermensch. It is that overwhelming arrogance that paralyzes his analytical mind. His superiority complex tells him that a creature this pathetic could never be a threat, could never be a highly trained operative. His ego blinds him to the surveillance, not his peripheral vision shutting down. Counterintelligence didn't hack his ears. They hacked his arrogance.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective by moving to the final culmination of the operation. If arrogance was his only vulnerability, words would have captured him. But capturing a master spy, requires overwhelming physical force. Let's examine the ambush in the night garden.
Okay.
Chernonosov reaches his door, puts his key in the lock, still entirely wrapped in that arrogance, believing he is untouchable. In an instant, operatives ambush him, pin his arms, and snap a stiff mechanical collar around his neck.
The capture scene. It's incredibly sudden.
And it is the ultimate proof of the supremacy of physical constraint. Why the collar? Why not just handcuffs? It is pure biomechanics. Counterintelligence knows that this spy has a cyanide capsule sewn into the lapel of his jacket. To commit suicide, he needs a specific range of motion. He needs to flex his cervical spine, dip his chin, and bite the fabric.
A very small movement.
Exactly. Which is why psychology isn't enough to stop it. The stiff mechanical collar physically removes the next degrees of freedom. It locks the cervical vertebrae in place. He cannot move his jaw to his chest. It doesn't matter how arrogant he is, or what his cognitive state is, or whether his gestalt is closed. His body is immobilized by mechanical engineering. The victory is secured by a physical cage.
The collar stops his body. I will grant you that. It's a brilliantly brutal piece of engineering, but it does not secure the victory. Even with that collar on, his ego remains completely intact. He is physically restrained, but mentally, he still believes he is superior. He thinks he just got unlucky with the numbers, that they simply ambushed him with more men. The true capture, the total annihilation of his resistance, doesn't happen until they drag him to the van.
You mean when he sees the driver?
Exactly. They drag him to the van, and he looks into the driver's seat. Sitting there, completely unharmed, is Bakhitsan, the same man Chernonosov personally shot point-blank just hours earlier. He watched the man fall. He heard the gunshot. In Chernonosov's reality, Bakhitsan is definitively dead.
It is certainly a shocking moment for him.
It is far more than shocking. It is a fatal systemic failure of his mind. When you are a master of control, an ideological Superman, and you suddenly see a dead man resurrect, the foundations of your sanity collapse. When the dead walk, the living go mad. In that split second, Chernonosov realizes that he has not been the predator, he has been the puppet. Every action, every murder, every escape was orchestrated by counterintelligence. That realization strips away his ego, his arrogance, and his entire psychological armor. The mechanical collar held his neck, but seeing Bakhitsan alive destroyed his mind.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Why is Bakhitsan alive in that driver's seat? You say it's to orchestrate a psychological shock.
Because the operation required it to break him? Yes.
No, Bakhitsan is alive because of a strictly physical, material intervention. Before the confrontation even took place, counterintelligence physically accessed the spy's hidden stash. They removed the live ammunition from his weapon and replaced the lead bullets with meticulously crafted blanks.
But the blanks?
The blanks were a masterpiece of physical replication. The weight was the exact same. The sound of the gunshot was the same. The recoil was the same. But there was no projectile. If counterintelligence had relied solely on psychological profiling, Bakhitsan would be dead and Chernonosov would have escaped. Without the empirical physical intervention of swapping lead for blanks, all the psychological theater in the world would have been powerless against the physics of a real bullet tearing through human tissue.
But the blanks alone didn't capture him. They just set the stage. If they had merely arrested him without showing him Bakhitsan, he would have sat in an interrogation room, smug and defiant, treating the whole thing as a temporary setback. He would have fought them every step of the way. The physical reality of the blank bullet only has power because of the psychological devastation it unleashes when he realizes the deception.
But that psychological devastation is fundamentally tethered to the material world. Throughout the entire novel, we see that empirical science, the precise layering of gunpowder residue baked like a cake, the unalterable foundational geometry of facial bones, the rigid biomechanics of a neck collar, and the ballistics of blank ammunition provides an inescapable physical cage. The spy can spin as many cognitive illusions as he wants, but ultimately the physical world strips those illusions away. Matter asserts its dominance over the mind.
And yet matter alone is blind. The physical tools, the colors, the blanks, the laboratory analyses, they are merely the canvas. Counterintelligence didn't defeat Chersonos just by measuring footprints or locking his neck. They defeated him by executing a masterful profiling of his cognitive biases. They understood his arrogance, his social blindness, and his deep-seated trauma. They knew exactly how he would react to the paratrooper drop, to the shattered decanter, and to the resurrected dead man. They didn't just build a physical cage, they manipulated his psyche so flawlessly that he walked blindly into it himself. The true battleground was always cognitive.
It seems clear that dismantling a sophisticated adversary requires what we might call stereoscopic vision. If you only look through the lens of empirical science, you see the mechanics of the crime, but you might entirely miss the vulnerabilities of the criminal.
And if you only look through the lens of psychology, you might understand the criminal's mind perfectly, but you lack the physical levers to actually stop them from pulling the trigger or swallowing the capsule. Nightshot shows us that you really need both. You need the physical evidence to ground the reality and the cognitive strategy to break the will. It really is a brilliant intersection.
It truly is. It leaves us to wonder when the final trap springs in that pitch-black forest we started in, whether it was the cold reality of the physical world or the inescapable weight of the human mind that ultimately dealt the fatal blow. There is certainly much more to explore within this material, but we will leave that for you to ponder.
Thank you for joining us.